We are well into the fall 2020 semester, and if you're anything like me, you probably can relate to the term Zoom fatigue. And so I want to take a moment and look into Zoom fatigue and actually understand why it's happening so that we can make changes to our teaching and learning to prevent that burnout. Honestly, I don't think we're on a sustainable pace. It's week 4 of the semester at the time of this filming, and Zoom burns me out. Zoom burns my students out. So what are we going to do? Well, I want to examine the problem and then suggest a solution. And that solution actually involves more camera off time. National Geographic posted this great article called Zoom Fatigue, in which they actually look into the scientific and biological reasons why Zoom fatigue is such a thing and why we can all likely relate to it. They kick their article off saying that virtual interactions can be extremely hard on the brain, and I think we've all felt that. So why is this? And to understand why this is, we need to go back to pre-COVID times and look at how humans interacted. If you and I were sitting down to have a conversation or met up on the street and decided to have a chat, we would be listening to each other's voice, and that would be kind of the conscious cue that we are really tuning into. However, our brain is going to be taking in multitude of non-verbal cues that let us know how this conversation is going and what to expect from each other throughout that conversation. And things like body posture and positioning. Am I facing you or am I facing away? Am I fidgeting, acting nervous? Am I kind of looking around, seeming bored and disinterested? Am I leaning in? What are my emotions on my face looking like? And even beyond that, our periphery, we're taking in all this information around us. And if we're talking to an audience or multiple people like teachers in front of a classroom, we're gauging the entire class at once through our periphery. This all happens naturally and subconsciously. It's going on whether we realize it or not. And what these nonverbal cues do is they inform our brain of what to expect from this conversation, what to expect from you, the listener, and the audience, so that we can react to it. And this goes all the way back to our basic evolutionary purpose of making sure that we are safe. We want to know how you're going to respond and anticipate so that we can better protect ourselves. Whether that be physical harm, emotional harm, or just how the conversation is going when we want it to go well, we're going to actively respond in our own responses based on how our brain is interpreting all these nonverbal cues. And again, the key point here is all of this is happening with very little conscious effort on your part. So now let's fast forward to current times with Zoom. Now, even if it's a one-on-one video conference, we are still trying to bring all of those nonverbal cues in. Our brain is still searching for those things to let us know how this conversation is going. However, in a small little box on a small screen, only seeing part of the body in potentially low resolution, those cues are not coming through. And so what our brain does is it looks harder for them. It pays more attention. It tries to really focus in to get those. We crave that feedback on how this interaction is going. It gives us guideposts to steer our response. And so the brain is searching for that. And that's a one-on-one. But what happens in these Zoom calls is now we have 5, 10, 20, 40 people or more all on the screen at once. And so your brain is trying to pick that up for all of them. And so your brain starts multitasking, trying to understand how this conversation is going from all these different people all at once. Psychologists call this continuous partial attention and essentially multitasking, and it's sending our brain into overdrive to try to infer these nonverbal cues that it is used to receiving, and it's failing. It's not getting them. So that does a couple of things. First, your brain gets tired from all that work. But second, it causes a stress response in that the brain recognizes, I don't know how this is going. I need to be defensive. I need to be ready to run, right? Kind of that fight or flight mode. It stimulates that adrenal response, and you are now having a stress response to this conversation that may not be stressful at all. So your brain's overworking itself, it's having a stress response, and that alone is enough to wear you out. And beyond this, we recognize that it is harder to convey nuanced emotion over video. So we exaggerate it. We're bigger, louder, more mobile. We have more extravagant hand gestures. We're trying to smile and also type in the chat. And that requires a lot more energy too, just to try to get what would naturally happen and come off with very little effort to convey across the screen. So these video conferencing meetings are wearing us out. What's the solution? The solution I'm going to propose, actually, we need to go back in time a little bit again and look at video conferencing and the history of video conferencing. When we look back in time at media, the idea of video conferencing was always the technology of the future. It was something that is going to be so grand and exciting, and we have holograms, right? If you watch any Star Wars, it's like a hologram is how they talk, and that's a form of like video conferencing, right? But we've had video conferencing technology for years. Zoom has been around for years, and my guess is the majority of you had never touched Zoom before 6 months ago. So why not? If video conferencing has been here for so long, why are we not using it? Well, everything that I just stated. We have come to understand that it's not what we think. We are not getting that biological need out of it. In fact, when you're just on a phone call with someone, there is one input source that you have to pay attention to. That is the audio, the voice. So you pay attention to tone and inflections and pacing and pauses to understand how things are going, and that allows your brain to relax. It doesn't have to pick up and look for all these other cues. It is able to focus in on the audio, and that's it. I know a lot of friends, and I'm even there sometimes, where the idea of making a phone call sounds terrible. And they're like, text me, do not call me. Or they won't even answer a phone call, they want to text. And so we've reduced this conversation down into the minimal input form. A text is just a line of text that you read and interpret. And it allows a lower stress response, lower effort on the brain's part. And so this is what we're used to. This is what society has been doing, and now we're trying to say, no, go all the way to video conferencing as the majority of our day. There's a lot of benefit to video conferencing. I love getting to see my students and have them smile and play some games with them and listen to music, but maybe we need more camera off time. And even if we think about, again, how successful learning looked before COVID-19, there was very little video conferencing. We'd have great speakers and influencers and really knowledgeable minds across the world giving webinars. And these webinars, they're on camera, but no one else is. Everyone else can type in the chat and they can respond, but they are still learning. They're learning really well. There's memes going around about Mr. Rogers and Bob Ross and other people who are some of the best teachers in the world did it all digitally. So what's the difference? Why did it work for them and not us? Again, one person on camera. In fact, me here talking to this camera, I'm able to know exactly where to focus. I know where to look. I know what to say. I don't need to worry about your response in the here and now, which opens up my mind to be creative and to have train of thought. What might be happening is we are so worried about our students participating that we're like, cameras on, cameras on. Everyone is wanting cameras on to make sure their students are participating. But what if the cameras on are creating such an emotional stress response in the brain that the learning isn't happening anyway? It doesn't matter if they're present looking at the screen if it's not actually happening. There are numerous ways to assess participation within even Zoom with things like polling and the emoji reactions or the chat that you could ask and have students engage in, or even using things like Google Docs to gauge responses live during a Zoom call without ever seeing people. And if you're watching a video together or looking at a resource, there's no need for the camera to be on. You don't want them looking at each other. You don't want them looking at you. You want them watching the video. I think we need less video conferencing time, less cameras on. You can host your Zoom sessions like a webinar where you're the only one on screen. You can lock the meeting in a way that turns off your students' microphone and camera. You're the only one on. They don't need to worry about other people seeing them. They can just focus on you. You can uncheck those things mid-meeting. So you can do breaks. You can start the class off with cameras and then turn them all off for the main part, and then turn them back on for a little bit of discussion, and then turn them back off. You can do this within Zoom. So I want to challenge you that this next week of teaching, find a way to do more camera off time in whatever way that looks. Try it this week. See how it goes. Maybe you'll feel better. Maybe your students will feel better. But the other side of this is we need to be able to gauge their responses. For this, I encourage you to stay tuned because I'm doing a video series here kicking off tomorrow with how we get meaningful feedback from our students. We just learned that we can't rely on the same feedback we're used to. So what can we do instead? To make sure you don't miss that, be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications, and leave a like on this video if you thought it was helpful, and let me know in the comments below if you're going to try to do more camera off time, if you're going to take the challenge I put out to you and turn your cameras off for a little bit.